are here with General Assembly today and our friends at America on Tech. So I'm excited for you guys to meet them as well. Today, though, we want to keep it on the future, like right now, looking at the future. And again, for those that don't know, the WYO Take Ownership podcast is a podcast that's all about taking ownership of your mental, your economics, and your community. And so we are working with General Assembly to really just change narratives, to highlight truths. And, we did a dope series earlier this summer focused on entrepreneurship and building a business from home because we're all sitting in our homes. And today we're going to focus in on education and taking ownership of your education, especially thinking through the skills gap and how we go about addressing that. And is there a skills gap? Is there an opportunity gap? Can both exist? These are questions I'm going to be talking to our guests about tonight. And first, I want to introduce and bring on Tom Ogletree, Senior Director of Social Impact and External Affairs at General Assembly, to begin having this conversation, because a lot of his work is literally at the intersection of ideas, education, community, public policy, how it all comes together. So Tom, absolute pleasure to have you tonight. And also good to see that you know my friends Ev and Jessica at America on Tech. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Ofo. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for joining us.
Absolutely. And so, you've been at General Assembly for 5 years now. You know the lay of the land. You've experienced it grow, change, all the things. What is General Assembly? Like, I want to let people know at home why they're here today.
Yeah, absolutely. So General Assembly is a global education company that's closing skills gaps for individuals and businesses. So really what that means is we're helping adults get the most in-demand skills of the digital economy. So we offer those through, historically through our campuses. I've got my background is set to the view of our San Francisco campus, though now everything's online, obviously, where people can come and either attend a class or workshop where they could learn a little bit about careers in tech or, what skills that they might want to sort of potentially pursue, take sort of light touch introductory programming to sort of get a lay of the land and see if it's something that can be, support a passion project or a side hustle or, an existing job path. But we have a lot of folks who are also coming through our doors who are completely changing their careers, looking to sort of break into something new. And so, are coming with us to learn from folks who have worked in industry, who really, get what the tech and data and design ecosystems are all about, and then working with us until they find jobs. We also do a lot of work in-house at companies. So helping big businesses who are undergoing digital transformation to kind of think through, how do I make sure that my people have the skills that they need to be successful as, technology is affecting every aspect of how I do business.
I actually didn't know that last part, and I'm gonna ask a question later on about that because it's very intriguing to me. But for GA, what's the origin story? Like, why did it start, and what was that? I guess what was that nugget or that inkling that went off to make you go, this makes sense to grow as a business?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually were founded kind of coming off the heels of the last recession, where there were a lot of folks who, were seeing all this opportunity in the tech and data design spaces and didn't really know how they could sort of find their way into that, short of going back to grad school or doing additional college. And so, we were really founded on this idea that, how do we sort of create accessible pathways for folks to sort of find their way into, careers in the digital space? And, really there wasn't a lot of sort of opportunity for folks to kind of come together with like-minded folks and sort of really build a community and really learn from experts who had worked in the field and learn in a way that was really aligned to what was in demand in the market, right? It's not about theory. It's about what are the things that you're going to be doing every day and how do you make sure that you sort of understand what that gain the skills that you need to be successful in those types of roles. And so, we were founded in New York City. We now are in 30 different markets all over the world, and I think have really sort of are really, part of this sort of broader shift that's happening where, all companies to one degree or another are tech companies, right? Whether on their surface it's financial services or media or telecom or whatever, right? There's increasing demand for these types of skills, not just in Silicon Valley, but, all over the world. And so I think that's really spurred the growth of our business. And I think what that's really been validated by the fact that a lot of companies are now coming to us and saying, help us work with our people as we're sort of grappling with these transformations ourselves and trying to make sure that the folks in our community have the skills they need to in our company have the skills they need to be successful as their jobs are evolving.
Sure. Well, and so in the beginning, in your early times with GA as well, what were some of like the anecdotal stories? Like what were you seeing to go, this actually works, and I'm sure that turns into data, just like hard data, but what were some of those early stories that made you realize that this makes a lot of sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of the kind of what we kind of came up with is, a real focus on outcomes. So for students who are coming to us to, change careers, which involves, it's a really intensive program, right? It's you quit your job, you come to us all day, every day for 3 months. It's a really intense experience, but within a 3 month period, you're ready to be hired as a entry level software engineer, UX designer, or data scientist, regardless of what you did before, whether that was being a professional dancer or managing a restaurant or working as a lawyer, right? People come to us from sort of all walks of life and pathways. So um, I think what we really focused on that job placement, and that was the sort of the key to I think our success was really sort of emphasizing that the career services, the job placement element, and ensuring really that everything was really highly relevant to what was in demand in the market. Right, you weren't just learning things for the sake of learning; you were learning things that were really sort of in demand in the world of work. And so our job placement rates have stayed really consistent, 90% within 6 months of course completion, and that's been remained pretty steady even as we've scaled up all over the world. But I think that those are the proof points that have really demonstrated to us that we can really be a really powerful tool for people who are making a change in their lives. I think through my work, what's really been important is, many people in the early days of GA, we didn't have loans, we didn't have scholarships, we didn't have other sort of financing options. So you had to be able to afford to be able to pay out of pocket, which was a real big barrier for a lot of folks. And so I think over time, what we've really seen is that by sort of creating more pathways to make GA more accessible and more affordable for folks, that people who may not have gone to college or may not have had a sort of a quote unquote traditional career pathway can still be really successful in our programs and get great jobs. And I think that really speaks to what we've built, is that it's not just for one kind of person or one kind of a learner, right? That it's really designed to be really flexible for a lot of different people who are bringing their past experience and their creativity and their passion, and that really being the driving factor in terms of their academic success, not whether or not you can memorize a certain number of things or pass a standardized test.
So I got to ask, because right now the context outside is that COVID-19 has affected all of our lives, and it's there's a lot of college students right now that are back on campus that are stuck now actually in their off-campus living, because they were supposed to be in school, but now they're not, right? Where they're in school but virtually. At this stage of the game, do you, in 2020, being as it is and how forward technology we are, do you find that it's actually more advantageous for someone to go through a GA course than it would be to go to college, or do they kind of play off each other? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
It's a good question. I mean, I think, the reality is that most folks who are coming through GA's doors are a little bit older than college age, right? So they're typically in their mid 20s to mid 30s and they're career changers, right? They've been working in one field or one industry or a few fields or a few industries and they're looking to make a pivot. I mean, I think what the value proposition of GA really underscores the fact that like there isn't one type of educational experience that's one size fits all, right? That people need different things at different points in their lives. And especially as technology is changing in real time, the notion that like you have your learning at this one moment in your life and that stops is just not what the future holds, right? And so I think, we are very aware that, even as we switch to an all remote environment, that we've had really sort of positive responses from our students, even folks who had really signed up for an in-person experience, that the remote experience, while people miss the campuses and the energy of the being in the classroom with folks, our NPS scores have remained really high. Our outcomes dropped a little bit, understandably, but our students are still getting good jobs. We're seeing a lot of demand for folks who had been working in industries that are not coming back anytime soon, or not for a very long time, right? So a lot of people who worked in retail and who are bartenders or working in the restaurant industry, who are now trying to figure out sort of like, I want something a little bit more sort of like stable and predictable, given that what I was doing is has really been disrupted by all of this. So, and we've been doing some partnerships with colleges, universities. We're doing a big partnership with CUNY around helping both their current students and recent graduates access a lot of our sort of digital skills fundamentals programming online. Making sure that just from a career exploration perspective that folks are sort of be able to sort of access and learn about that. We're doing a lot of partnerships with governments and to help sort of workers who have been displaced by COVID. So doing a big partnership in Louisville, Kentucky, with employers there, with the mayor's office to help train workers who have lost their jobs because of COVID. Just announced another one in Sacramento, another one in Atlanta. Buffalo's on the horizon as well. So I think there's a real role to play for us. But I would also name that, like, community, this also creates opportunities for universities and community colleges to really be innovative around how they think about, meeting folks where they are. But at the end of the day, I think our success has been more of sort of a recognition that, people's education and career pathways are really going to vary more and more as sort of the external world is changing. And we're seeing that really accelerated by COVID. And so, we know that we play a role in that ecosystem, but, folks like us, folks like the Americana Tech team who we're going to be speaking with are all sort of part of that broader sort of ecosystem of providers who are really acknowledging that there is no right way to learn and right way to sort of find your way in the world of work, and that people need different things at different times that can sort of meet them where they are.
So it's kind of picking up off of that. We're going to talk about this concept called the skills gap that we'll break into more. But so for me, I have my own tech company. Team now is about 15 people. I talk oftentimes in the interview process about this concept of being addicted to learning, right? And anyone that works with us has to be, because things, like you said, move so fast. It really ends up being code for, if you're not willing to continuously learn, you will be left behind. Right. And that we see that manifest itself in real life, right, across different industries. For other companies, like how do you guys go about addressing that and partnering with them to solve those problems when it comes to their employees growing with the firm? Because historically, the way we'd see it coming up is a company may pay for you to return and get your master's at with some program and then come back, right? But how is General Assembly kind of fit its way into that path, if you will, for companies to think about as an alternative?
Yeah, and as a business leader yourself, I'd love to get your reaction to this. But my take from the GA point of view is that I think what we're a lot of times the assumptions, especially when the conversations around the skills gap, are really around hard hard skills, right? The idea is that, like, if you know how to program in a specific language, that's going to, solve a business problem or allow you to be successful in your career. Where the reality is that so much of it's about, like, your mindset, right? That addiction to learning, that sense of being resourceful, being able to collaborate with teams, being able to be, solution oriented, being able to sort of tackle complex problems, being able to sort of like, encounter things that are unfamiliar or new and see that as an opportunity to challenge yourself rather than something that is a blocker, right? And I think that's so much, and I think it often sort of trips a lot of some of the businesses that we talk to up as we're sort of talking about, some of these concepts. Is so much of this more is about creating a mindset than it is about sort of having a particular set of skills, because those skills are not going to be useful forever, right? The shelf life of skills is shrinking, right? Like the value that you are able to bring if you know how to do a particular thing, is only going to be last for so long, because the world is just changing in real time. But if you have a learning mindset, if you have that flexibility, if you have a sort of a problem solving orientation, if you're resourceful and you're willing to work with people, that's the thing that really sets people apart. I don't know if that's consistent with your experience, but I think increasingly, like, that's the sort of the paradigm that we're trying to make in terms of how people think about their own learning and development.
No, 100%. I mean, and I was reading something earlier about how it's the soft skills that really matter, right? If you can find someone who's amenable, who's open to change, who's open to learning and growing with the team, and and they have a bend towards knowing the stuff that you need them to know, they're going to keep iterating off of what they know and making themselves better, making themselves a sharper tool for the company as a whole. Um, so I definitely see that, and I guess how knowing that's the case, how do you at GA then go about splitting that time, like that learning time? How much of it goes towards shifting the mindset of people that join versus, or and I should say, giving them that hard skill that they can leave in a few months with?
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you're going through one of our 3-month immersive classes, at the beginning, you're going to, be experiencing much more sort of like what you'd see in the traditional sort of college classroom, right? It's the instructor at the front of the room. Now, granted, they have, their code up on the screen. They're doing it live in real time. Folks are following along and copying that. But as the course goes on, it becomes less like a classroom experience and more like work, right? You're doing project-based work with folks on teams. You're using the tools that are used in many sort of like dev shops. And also doing collaborations with other sort of students potentially with who are learning user experience design or data science, and really sort of doing that kind of project-based work. And we drop a new programming language on students 2/3 of the way through the program, with the idea that what the stack that you're learning in the classroom may not be the stack that you're going to be working on day in, day out. So much of it is about being resourceful, right? How do you, when you don't know something, how do you learn? How do you solve problems? How do you ask for help? How do you seek out resources that can help you understand something, a concept or a language that's totally new to you, right? And so I think that the two things really work in close parallel, because it's about sort of adopting a behavior of constant learning, of resourcefulness, of collaboration. I think the sort of the old image of the software engineer as somebody who's sort of like sitting in the corner by themselves is just not really reflective of how most sort of tech and startup communities actually work. It's all about collaboration, problem solving, figuring out how to sort of troubleshoot things that have never been seen before, right, or never been seen by the folks in the room. So really so much of it is about not just sort of getting those hard skills, which are absolutely critical, but those also that sort of like that creativity, solution orientation, problem solving mindset, adaptability, willingness to sort of like take on new challenges, learn, be flexible, and also be tolerant of ambiguity, right? Like, you're a founder, I'm sure Evan and Jessica can speak to this as well. Like, you're living in a constant state of ambiguity, right? And so being able to sort of be resilient and resourceful in that kind of uncertainty, I think, is so much of what we try to impart through the classroom experience. And then hopefully that serves folks well when they're on the job.
And do you find that, so for corporates that you partner with, do you find that they are as thirsty for the mindset shift as they are for the hard skills being learned by their employees, or is it one usually actually over the other? 'Cause I can imagine for a corporate, sometimes it probably is just the thought first is we just want them to be able to do this thing. And maybe you guys are the ones that are like, hey, but in order to be able to do that, we have to change the mindset, the culture, the framework. Is that what you've noticed and witnessed?
You're exactly right. I think so much of it is like, we need everybody to be data scientists. And it's like, well, not necessarily, right? You need everybody to have a fluency with data. You need to have everybody be able to sort of talk to data scientists and ask the right kind of questions and understands the systems and the tools and the processes so that they can thoughtfully and intentionally scope work so that you can deliver successful projects. But not everybody needs to know all of the hard skills. So much of it is about just having a common language, a common vocabulary, a shared view of what these different tools are, and the way that that sort of translates into actual work product, right? And so I think so much of it, and while those hard skills are absolutely critical, right? I mean, we wouldn't be in business if that wasn't sort of a big piece of it. Often the sort of the starting point for the conversation is, we think we need this. So we're like, yes, you need this, but more than that, you need a sort of a mindset, a culture, a set of behaviors, and also a sort of a common language and vocabulary, so that people are talking to each other and not across each other.
Right, for sure. So, like, prior to, I know Amanda and I were going back and forth with different articles and stuff about the skills gap. And one of the things is that 80% of Americans feel that there truly is one. And I mean, I guess my question to you would be, understanding that there is this gap. That's why companies are bringing you in. There is this gap. That's why people are changing their careers, learning from you guys, and then moving forward. Um, are you finding there is as much of a skills gap as there is opportunity gap when you're in the impact space? So, what are your thoughts on kind of the confluence of those two things?
I mean, I think the opportunity gap is a much bigger problem than the skills gap. I mean, I think there is tremendous talent out there that is not given the opportunity to sort of one see and hear and engage with these types of career pathways, and opportunities, much less sort of have the opportunity to sort of engage with those skills. I think a lot of students who have participated in some of our programs and partnerships through our kind of our social impact work have been sort of like forced into these very narrow boxes that haven't really allowed them to really unleash their full talent and their capabilities. And so I think one of the things that, whether it is America on Tech, whether it's General Assembly, that is, I think, kind of core to how we operate, is to sort of like demystify a lot of this stuff, to recognize that, like, look, this isn't necessarily a career pathway for everyone, but recognizing what these opportunities are, recognizing what these ecosystems are, understanding what you need to do to be able to be successful, and that you actually can be successful. You don't have to go to like MIT to become, pursue like a career in technology, right? There are other pathways and ways of learning. And so, I think the bigger problem that we're facing is that opportunity gap, and really just making sure that people know what their options are, have ways to sort of accessibly engage with them, and also sort of have it in a way that is sort of like affordable and able to be, integrated into their lives, right? I mean, I think we're seeing this as we're all working from home, is that, for parents of school age kids, like, managing, working and, parenting is brutal. And it's similarly the case when you're trying to learn or gain a whole new set of skills, right? So being able to sort of have the sort of flexibility to meet people where they are, wherever that is, I think is absolutely critical to sort of addressing that. But I also think there needs to just be a kind of a fundamental disruption of, the perceptions around who gets to participate in these spaces and who gets to be in these rooms, right? And who gets to be decision makers. And I think we have a lot of work to do in the United States, but also around the globe, to sort of help to sort of like illuminate some of those pathways so that people can sort of find their way in a way that works for them.
Absolutely. I know, the CEO of Wells Fargo was under a bunch of heat last week for making comments about, they struggle to find Black talent. And, people have, it's nonsensical, but if you don't really know how to go about finding talent, then you won't find the talent, right? So if you're not sourcing the HBCUs, if you're not engaged with local communities, if you're not asking the right people or in the right rooms, or have the right people at the table, you're never going to really find out the answers. And so I am very interested in how we bridge, what was already historically happening with now this drastic change in the last 6 months or so, where you're right, people are working from home with their kids right behind them, jumping on the bed. Many folks also just don't have access to internet. And so their kids stopped going to school in early March and really have not returned to school since. And the gap is just widening from opportunities, skill set, learning. But it brings me to this question. One of our audience members is asking, and they say, are there any trends you are seeing during the pandemic around tech? Has there been a shift in what people are interested in learning or anything of the sort?
No, but I think we're seeing just more demand in general, right? And I think especially through some of these public private partnerships, we're able to sort of like get creative about sort of, okay, if you don't have accessible Wi-Fi, how do we get you accessible Wi-Fi? If you don't have the machine you need, how do we get you the machine you need, right? If you need sort of additional services or support, referrals to public benefits, childcare, housing assistance, rent abatements, whatever, right? How can we sort of work with you to sort of make learning possible? And I think, one, that sort of helps people get in the door, but also stay throughout the experience. I would also just name that I think that we're just seeing more demand from more folks who are just saying either like, I didn't like my job that much anyway, or I want to think a little bit differently about my career because, you know, working in like I loved working in the restaurant industry, but it just doesn't feel like there's a sort of a stable and sustainable future for me. So I just got to figure something else out, right? And obviously that's sad for so many reasons that you have these sort of really vital and important industries that have really shrunk. But it has sort of, I think, opened up people's curiosity about being like, what are the alternatives, right? Like, what could my path look like? And I think that's opened the door for a lot of folks to say, maybe learning some UX design or data analytics or digital marketing or coding could sort of help get me onto a path that's more sustainable. And then maybe I can find other ways to sort of, serve that passion, whether it's for, music or food or whatever, in a different kind of way.
In some of your work, do you find, like, when you mentioned data analytics and data science and all these things, do you find that some of your job is to kind of unpack or demystify these seemingly big titles or big spaces, and what does that work look like? And I say that because, this is like 3 years ago now, maybe almost 2 years ago. But at the time, we were doing an online equity crowdfund campaign for Who's Your Landlord for my company. And what I found was I really wanted a way because a lot of the VCs and whatnot that I was meeting, a lot of the investors I was meeting were older white guys. And so I wanted a way for, Black people to invest in a tech company, because the assumption is always, oh, people assume you're public, like you must be like a Facebook or something. Um,
Right.
and there's ways to invest in the private markets that can create a lot of wealth that we see a lot of these accredited investors having. But I found that when I was, this is, I guess, early, it was end of 2017, early 2018. I found at that period of time I was pitching two things. One is I was pitching first the idea that you could invest in my company, but the second layer, and actually what ended up being the first layer, was what does it even mean to invest in my company? How does equity work? What is the mechanism for how this even works at all? So I was teaching two things at once. But I think that has changed a lot in the last 2.5 years. I think now people are maybe a little bit more understanding of how the flow works beyond just what they're learning on Shark Tank. But even for you, how do you think about demystifying these seemingly crazy industries or verticals that maybe are can be simply explained?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question. I mean, I think the way that I think about it is, one, it's going to take a lot of organizations, right? And that's why I think that, like, America on Tech is reaching high school students, right? Often in sort of like in underserved communities, right? And so you need to hit people at different points throughout their lives and their career sets. I also think that one thing that I sometimes get frustrated, you know, in terms of my own conversations with funders around just sort of like, helping people be successful in training experiences like GAs, is like, one, there is no sort of like one size fits all solution that's just going to, like, solve any individual's problems. That's
Right.
just, that's not the way that things work, right? People need different learning experiences, different opportunities to, you know, get to learn, to get mentorship, to have people invest in them, both monetarily, but also in terms of their time and energy and support, right? So that's one piece of it. And the other thing is that, people need multiple experiences throughout their careers. I know that I'm sure that you could name, in terms of your own career trajectory, multiple people who have sort of helped you to sort of like find your path and have invested in you, multiple sort of experiences that have helped to sort of like shape your own kind of growth. I mean, I would not be where I am without the mentors who supported me, the people who, saw something in me and took a bet on me. And sort of like, also just, the space to kind of like mess up and fail, or sort of find yourself in a, sort of painted into a corner, right? That's all part of any individual's like growth experience. So I think, ultimately, I think we need to really recognize that, this needs to happen at multiple for any human being to be successful in the world of work. You need a lot of support from a lot of people and a lot of touch points at a lot of different points, right? And people are ready for different stuff at different times, and that is okay, right? And I think that one of the things that I think is so much about what we really try to foster in terms of when people are sort of coming to how to break into the startup scene or how to get a job in tech workshops, is that you're making a change. This is scary, it's vulnerable, it's hard, like it takes a lot of like trust in yourself and a lot of dealing with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of risk. And so how do we sort of give you as much information that you need to sort of feel like you are in an environment where you can sort of grow and learn and be supported, but also that that if you're not ready for us, here's some other things that you can do, right? And I think so much of it is about creating different ways to meet people where they are, wherever they are, but also making sure that they're consistent ways and that people are sort of inspired, empowered, and are given the space and the opportunity to be successful and try things out and to learn. I don't know if that answers your question, but I mean,
it does. It does. This is so. Last night was a debate, and all the
was it a debate?
Right, fair, right? But each candidate got 2 minutes to answer each question, and they didn't get a chance usually to answer them without one speaking over the other. We all know which one was that. But that being said, I have a few questions here from the audience. I have about a 9-minute-ish window here. So I want to get you to give me 2 minutes on each of these answers here. The first one ties into exactly what you were saying. It's, if you were to rethink your career path, what tech vertical would you pursue and why? And I feel like it ties into what you were saying because, there are multiple touch points with how we determine where we end up. And what I love about the fact that in our prep call, just briefly before this, you already knew Evan Jess, as mentioned, which means that the industries run close. If you're doing the right work and doing the hard work, you end up running into many of the same people. So for you, even though you've been able to cultivate this great career, have you ever thought about have you ever rethought your career path? And what tech vertical would you pursue?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I actually come from the nonprofit sector, so I worked all the nonprofits before I came to GA, and so really came in to sort of help kind of think about our own kind of like mission and kind of social justice commitments, right? So, one of the things I'm good at sort of like raising money and building programs and building partnerships, right? So I'm not really a technologist myself. I mean, I think as somebody who's a kind of a creative person, I've always found like UX design to be really fascinating. And also because I'm just fundamentally interested in people. And I think there's something about UX that sort of mixes the sort of like human psychology with creative design elements, and then sort of helping to be the translator between like the highly technical, developers and then maybe the lay end user, that I think is really fascinating. I also do really love data, and I geek out around sort of like big data sets. So that's something that I enjoy as well. But I mean, I think I wish General Assembly had been around when I was, in my 20s and trying to figure out my life, and was hating my job and didn't know what I wanted to do. And I think that the fact that there are we're just one of many organizations, America on Tech, Europe, Perscolis, Merit America, all these different groups that are out there doing incredible work to sort of help folks, sort of find their way in. And so, I also think that hopefully that speaks to a broader shift, that there isn't a sense that like, when you're 18 years old, you got to have a certain kind of experience, and that's going to be the thing that like sets you up for your future career path, right? Because that's just like not the way the world works anymore. And so I think beyond the just sort of like what path would I take, I just reflect a lot on sort of like that sense that there's only one way to kind of find your way in the world of work if you want to work in a certain type of industry. And so I think that is something that I wish for my 20-something self.
No, I definitely understand. So I have another question here for you. So how has the current unemployment crisis affected students who are graduating from your programs and were expecting a new job with their new skill set?
It is the biggest thing keeping all of us up at night, for sure. I mean, I think we saw a pretty big drop in terms of just like the week over week placements as compared to the sort of pre-recession. right at the beginning, that is swinging back up again. I think, you know, the Dow jumped today. Is there sort of discussion of a new economic stimulus? So I think, there are sort of, and I think the careers that we train for are much more resilient than many other kind of job categories. And MZ, which is like a labor market analytics firm, put out a really interesting report around sort of resilient skills, and many of the ones that GA teaches are much more sort of insulated. But we're certainly not immune to it, and I think it's something that our career coaches who already work really hard are working overtime to support students, because also so much of this is like psychological. Everybody's like stuck at home. All you're doing, going through an application and interview process all on Zoom. It's not the same, right? And people are struggling, and things are really uncertain, and navigating mental health issues. So that affects your ability to like maintain confidence, resilience in a job search. So there are just like a multiplicity of factors that are really sort of making it tough for folks. But I think we're trying to do everything we can to keep our grads on track with their searches, keep them feeling sort of motivated and resilient, helping them to sort of find opportunities to pick up short-term or gig or part-time work using their new skills that can help kind of keep them building their portfolios, their resumes, and really just working with employers to make sure that they know that we have this phenomenal talent coming out of our program. So, I think we're weathering the storm probably better than many educational providers. But it is something that I think is just there's so much uncertainty, and there's just a lot we can't control.
Got you. And so the nerd in me has to ask, and this is more from a strategic perspective. As GA was getting started, where was the focus really, like in terms of, did you guys feel like first let's hire and figure out the people who will help with the job placements first and learn what these companies need, and then we'll train to that? Or did you say, no, we're going to train around ubiquitously, use things across these industries, and then we're going to hire the right people to help with that offboarding and then onboarding into companies? Where was the focus more so in the beginning?
That is a great question. And I wasn't there in the beginning, so this is sort of my own kind of like inherited,
Sure.
perception. But so I think the original idea was like, okay, there's a lot of demand for these skills. There's so much demand that like a lot of these companies can't hire fast enough, right? And we're not talking about Facebook and Google. We're talking about, other companies in other sectors who have just as much demand for web developers or UX designers, but can't compete with the big Silicon Valley firms for, the folks who are coming out of super elite, computer science programs, right? What could we teach something in a relatively short period of time if it's tightly aligned to the skills that are used on day one of that job? Two, rather than hiring people with PhDs, though some of our instructors do have PhDs, but could we hire people who have worked in industry, who know what it's like to do this work, and who have a passion for teaching, to sort of help put this in real life context? And can we make all of our curriculum really tightly aligned to what's in demand in the labor market? And then really add that career coaching element, which helps students to sort of articulate what their personal brand is, right? So if you've worked in, and I keep going back to the restaurant industry, but I think it's a good example. Like if you've managed a restaurant, right, you know how to handle stress, you have good customer service skills, you know how to sort of deal with sort of ambiguity, you know how to deal with the front of the house and the back of the house, right? Like you have all these sort of highly relevant skills that you could put to work in another context. So if we sort of leverage your past experience, whatever that is, right, and then sort of add on top of that, a really, in-demand skill set, and put you through a really intense program. It's 12 weeks, it's intense, it's all day, every day, it's a pressure cooker, right? You got to be motivated, you got to be passionate, you got to be committed, you got to have grit. Like you really, have to put a lot of yourself into that to be successful. Then chances are we can sort of get you hired, especially if your competition is maybe straight out of a 4-year degree program and hasn't had a lot of workforce experience, right? And I think we've been able to really prove that that works. I think the thing that we have had to learn is that we can't do that for all industries, right? Or all job categories, right? There are going to be limits to that. You probably don't want like a brain surgeon, like doing a 3-month immersive and then, doing this work. And, I think we also have to set expectations, right? Like you're not going to be like a senior engineer at Google after doing 3 months of training. It's just not possible. But we are going to give you that, as we were talking about earlier, that mindset, that resilience, that learning mentality, that resourcefulness, so that you can grow really fast. And I think what's cool is that a lot of times we see folks who graduated 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago who are now coming back and hiring GA grads because they're managing large teams within their own organization. So, I think the other thing is that we had to have a certain degree of humility that like, we're not a one size fits all for all students, and we're not a one size fits all for all industries, right? And so I think figuring out how to sort of strike the right balance and be really intentional about that has been a big part of our own journey. But really, it started with the ultimate customer for GA is the hiring manager, right? The person who's hiring the graduate. They have to be happy, right? So like, the student has to get, and that's our promise to the students, is that we help them get to that point, right? So everything else has to be in service to that.
Awesome. No, I appreciate that breakdown. I'm always intrigued by the nuances of how companies look at whatever it is that they're doing, and how which part of the pipeline is the most important to fill up first or figure out first, so the rest of it fits. So I have one last question for you today, and I appreciate all the insight you've been giving us. I think people at home are learning a ton. My last question is from an audience member as well. What are some big gaps in the ed tech space that have arisen in virtual learning from K to 12? In other words, if you were to go out and solve a problem in that space, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is the online learning experience for most students is terrible. I also teach at a traditional higher ed, in a graduate program, and like they were not ready. They're still not ready. They've been doing it since March, and like they haven't been able to sort of figure out systems and tools that work. If people could figure out how to make the online educational experience, especially for little guys, like you have, like 4 and 5-year-olds on Zoom it's like, it's, how, that's, I think, the thing that like, we've been doing it for years, so we were able to adapt pretty readily. And because many people are going into digital careers where they're all on remote teams, like it's less sort of disruptive. But I think if people could figure out, I don't know, maybe it's like creating more kind of like virtual spaces and worlds for people to interact as like avatars, I don't know, right? But like, the I think that's the thing that's like the biggest pain point right now, is how do you deliver a quality learning experience that recognizes that you can't just do what you do in the classroom, right? Which I think is happening in a lot of four-year institutions in particular. And is also being sort of like foisted onto, a lot of K-12 educators who just who are smart and passionate and dedicated, but don't have the tools, the resources, the training, the support to be able to sort of like shift into this totally new reality. So if anybody can figure that out, you'll be the next Google.
No, it's really interesting you bring that up. So shout out to the team at Blavity and AfroTech, because I know that, I think next month they're doing the AfroTech virtual world. Where normally, I'd be there every fall. You link up in the Bay Area and be all these amazing Black people from all over the tech industry that would, land on the Bay Area and have these amazing events. And so now, I guess the way they've structured it is they've teamed up with some gaming companies, and you're going to be virtually walking through the spaces and learning. And so I am very intrigued to see how that world, innovates and changes as we realize this is kind of our new norm for at least another year. I do want to ask this last question. I know I just want to be mindful of time here as we shift over to America on Tech, but this is from a former GA alum, or the former GA student. So the old school alum from 2014 says, "I love GA, and I want the school to succeed. But we're all, meaning everyone in education, talking about the conversation at the wrong level. It's time to focus on change making and painting a better picture of the world. What's the next level for GA?"
That is a great and big question. I mean, I think we have a new amazing CEO. Her name is Lisa Lewin, who joined us a little over a month ago. And I think for her, it's all around accessibility, right? How do we think about having more programming in multiple languages, being able to move into multiple geographies, being able to adapt to most of our curriculum is in English at this point, right? So, being able to sort of adapt to a truly global economy, but also, the reality is like our programs are expensive, right? And right now we're not eligible for sort of federal funding, educational funding like Title IV and Pell. We don't want to be because it's caused a lot of problems for other sort of for-profit education providers in the past. But how do we sort of stop making the expectation that individual students have to be responsible for bearing the full cost of their education, right? And so, employers have a role to play, government has a role to play, and there could be ways that you can also, we've been experimenting with a lot of new financing options that are, you don't pay anything up front and you pay a certain share of your income after you get a job. But I think at the end of the day, that still leaves open a lot of questions about access and equity. And so I think beyond just the sort of like the broader perception gaps that need to continue to be shattered around who has a place in this world of tech, data, design, digital marketing, you name it. How do you remove as much friction just from I can get it accessibly, I can get it affordably, I can do it based on the other things that are happening in my life, right? And I can do it in my native language, right? And I think that's really where we're sort of like headed in terms of our future. And hopefully we'll get there.
Absolutely. Well, Tom, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm glad Amanda introduced us. You seem like a really cool dude, man. And so kudos to you on the work you're doing and the work you're continuing to do. Where can people find you? How can people connect with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. You can also email me. My email is tom.o@ga.co. So, feel free to get in touch. I'm always happy to make time when I can to connect with folks. So would love to see a lot of LinkedIn invites after this from folks who are interested in learning more.